think it's very, very difficult for a person to recover by themselves. I don't know of anybody who has, probably because if they recovered by themselves, they're staying by themselves. But it is definitely a community activity to recover. We need the help of others. That's why in the 12-step process, it's important to go to meetings and hear the story, hear the experience, strength, and hope of others. To connect with a sponsor is what they call that in the 12-step process. Somebody who can mentor you, coach you along. And again, that's where having a partner from the faith community can be a help, and in the community of faith, if they're ready to take that step and to make that go with that bridge to the faith community, and the faith community to come across that bridge with people in recovery. But it is a community, and that community needs to go both directions. So, yes, community is vital. I think there's a variety of things that churches can do. One of the things that I think is very creative that a friend of mine, a pastor friend of mine, his congregation has done, is he has built a relationship with the 12-step meeting that is in his church building. It is a mission field to recognize and see this mission field that is right in our church. And sometimes that takes a little effort, because most 12-step meetings want to be autonomous, they want to be anonymous, and sometimes there is stigma coming out of the 12-step community against organized religion, against the church, and so it takes a degree of trust building for that to happen. Sometimes even just to start to attend a 12-step meeting. 9 out of 10 12-step meetings are open meetings. You don't have to be an alcoholic or a drug addict to attend a meeting, but just to go and to participate and to listen, to start to build relationships. What my pastor friend has done with his church is that as they built trust, they began to offer childcare for the NA meeting that met in their church, because sometimes people are court-ordered to go to a 12-step meeting, but they have children, and they don't have the support system in place to send their children someplace else so that they can go to their 12-step meeting. Sometimes it's not even because they're court-ordered, but just for themselves. They need the meeting. And so they take their children. Well, then the children can be bored and disruptive in the meeting, and people are in the meeting and they kind of don't like that the children are there, because everybody's there to get the benefit of the meeting. What this church did was saying, well, we can provide a room, and we'll provide some care for the children who come, and thankfully the servant leaders of that meeting were open to allow that to happen. And it's worked into a phenomenal relationship between that congregation and that meeting. And they've sponsored some on anniversary dates and at holidays, even having dinners with this, providing special Christmas celebrations and so on. And so that's been a really special outreach and unique. Congregation has also provided a prayer room for an NA or 12-step meeting that was theirs. And just completely optional. Anybody who's at the meeting, if you want prayer for anything, to have the pastor or an elder or deacon or whoever is there is available to pray with somebody. But I think the important thing is for the church to maybe have some folks who are willing to put themselves into the mission field, into this subculture, and to cross that bridge first. You know, Christ loves us before we even know who he is. And I think that it's important for the church to be incarnational in that way, for us to be Christ for the recovery community and to reach out to them first before we wait for them to come to us. When the church can do that, even if it is, unfortunately, in providing help in a funeral service for a family. Most times there will, in a community, be maybe an annual event where they're remembering the folks who died from overdoses. I've been in our own community at those events where we've had, way too many people have died. And I've gone to the events and I'm the only pastor who is there. And I'm like, this incredible opportunity for the churches to come and pastors to come and be present at least with people who have lost loved ones because of this opioid epidemic. To take that initiative would be a starting step. I think that would be a wonderful way to at least begin the process of reaching out and making a connection with the recovery community.
I think if the faith-based communities are working on evaluating how to respond to things like the opioid epidemic and other substance use related issues, for me, one of the things that I'm the most grateful for having had as like an adolescent, I guess, growing up with a substance use disorder was my youth group. I grew up like roughly in New Swickley Township, which is right outside of Pittsburgh, and I had a very, very strong youth group there. Is this a Presbyterian church? Because that youth group was Presbyterian as well. And that youth group really was one of the only places when I reflect back in my adolescence, I felt connected and I felt accepted and I felt comfortable. And those were some of the only years that I really remember like not going all out with my substance use. I didn't feel the need to like party hard. I felt like I had people that I could turn to. But at the same time, no one was addressing my trauma. No one was recognizing like, hey, maybe something's up with this kid. No one really approached me about it. And I think that I was too scared to approach anyone else. So I think if the faith-based community is looking at what they can do to help, I think it's offering information, providing and holding safe space, especially for kids, because that's where the trauma starts. A lot of people think, the gateway drug is alcohol or the gateway drug is marijuana. There's no gateway drug. The gateway to substance use disorders is trauma. That's the missing piece that I think a lot of entities and agencies and boards and, we talk about the fancy aspects of like drug and alcohol administration. We're missing the trauma piece. We're missing the mental health piece. So I think for churches and communities, we need to be offering safe space and services, maybe even at no cost. You know what I mean? Pastors who are willing to sit with families or other trained professionals who are willing to sit with families who are going through these situations, provide Narcan trainings or have other agencies come in and do those Narcan trainings so that these families are armed. Keeping recovery-based literature stocked in the annexes and in the narthexes of the churches. I think information is power. I think support is essential to individuals in recovery, and I think it's also being aware of the language that we're using, because language is so important. I myself identify as an addict. I'm a member of a 12-step fellowship. We do that for us, not for the community around us. I need to remember on a daily basis that I am an addict, because for me there are things I have to do every day to keep myself safe and in check. When I forget that I'm an addict, that's when I tend to spiral out of control. But to the greater community, I'm an individual with a substance use disorder. I have a chronic, progressive, and fatal if untreated disease of the brain that I have no control over. I was born into that, and it was aggravated by my environment, by my trauma, by situations that I had no control over when I was growing up. And I think it's important to recognize that. We're not just junkies. We're not just, people on the street who made a choice and deserve to die because of that choice. We are human beings. I'm a wife. I am a supervisor. I'm a coworker. I'm a friend. Sometimes I'm a teacher. I wear all kinds of hats. I'm a daughter. I'm a granddaughter. These are gifts of my recovery. I recently had a major moment of connection. This past year in my recovery was one of the hardest years of my recovery. In 2014, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer, and they told me that it was probably a result of my history of abuse. Because cervical cancer is typically, catalyzed by the HPV virus. And they said that it's likely that I contracted that through my abuse. So I really held a pretty heavy resentment. And then I got married a year later, and my husband and I, we have been trying to start a family for about 4 years now. And between January of 2017 to January of 2018, I had 3 miscarriages. And for me, those experiences, I was supported the whole entire time. I had a cancer diagnosis. I did not have to use to cope with that because I was in the middle. We say in the middle, and what that means is I was surrounded by other people in recovery. I could pick up the phone and call. People picked up the phone and called me to check on me. People brought food to our house and sent me flowers and visited me in the hospital. And with each of my miscarriages, there were a series of surgeries. One of my miscarriages was actually very traumatic. It was an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured. And I very nearly bled to death. And that was a series of blood transfusions and medication and operations. And, my fellowship of supports and recovery was there for me every single step of the way. And in my process of processing all of those emotions, I had a sponsor who loved me unconditionally through all of it, through all of the anger that I felt, when I was mad at God, and she told me, God can handle your anger, give it to him, you don't have to carry that, tell me, get it out. So I didn't have to bottle things up the way that I used to, and that was very therapeutic for me, and that was really this last year has kind of been the culmination of all of that, where I'm able to look back and I'm able to say, I made it through some really tragic and difficult things in the last few years of my recovery that I didn't have to use through because I had that support and that connection. So I think for me it was the non-judgmental aspect of being able to just share how I felt without any fear that I was going to be judged or spoken poorly about.
When I first got into alcohol and drug treatment, I worked with a gentleman named Smokey Joe, and he had been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 25 years, and he was working the same detox unit I started working in, and we spent a lot of time talking because I would relieve him on his shift. And he said, well, Lee, you know, if you really want to understand who we are, you need to go to AA meetings. And so I thought, well, that's good advice, and so I did. I figured I'd just go to maybe 10 or 12 of them or something. And over the next 3 years, I went to 400 because I was absolutely enthralled with the people I met there and the stories of recovery. They would talk about how their life used to be and what it took for them to get into recovery. And I was amazed that some of these people made it into recovery, considering the life they described prior to their stopping their usage. And I was just, I mean, today, if you met any of those people on the street or in the job or store, you would never guess that that was in their background. And I just found myself extremely interested in that because I found that the real nature of God's forgiveness, you know, when we talk about that old hymn, Amazing Grace, I really saw amazing grace at work in these individuals, that you knew that only by divine intervention did some of these individuals get sober. And so their stories just were amazing to hear. And the hope, the love, the relationships they formed, it was like a lot of them rediscovered life, and a life that they never thought existed prior to that.